in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio. And last week, you had the interview with Dr. Daniel Amen that was on Longevity Junky. And hopefully you are enjoying that particular show and that you are subscribing to it, because there's a lot of great guests coming up there. And this week, though, I'm going to do the next episode because, again, it's extremely relevant to everything that we talk about on Sapio. We won't do this every week, but I wanted to give you at least some exposure to this show. And this week's interview is with Dr. Layne Norton. Many of you might know Layne through Instagram or whatever. He's a pretty big name right now in the world of diet, nutrition, particularly for weightlifters and that kind of thing. Anyway, really good conversation. I encourage you to check it out. After this week, we'll just go back to the usual episodes of Sapio. Once in a while, what I might do is I might start referring to some of the things that we talk about and drill down on those in detail. However, again, I would love it if you subscribe to that show because it's going to be really, really good. Really great guests coming up. Go to Longevity Junky, wherever you get this podcast. Definitely check it out. And if you like it, give us a 5-star review. And without further ado, here is Layne Norton.
Longevity Junky is presented to you by our friends at Acast.
What's up, Longevity Junky? It's time to get your fix. I'm Buck Joffrey, former board-certified surgeon, serial entrepreneur, professional investor, and most importantly, a health-conscious hedonist.
And I am Nikki Lee. I am an actress, model, and honestly, the Longevity Junky.
So we are coming to you today from not so sunny Montecito, California, but that's okay. It's still Montecito, California. Could be worse places to do this show from, and we are at my house.
Yeah, which is a lovely house, by the way. Yeah. Of course. And coming up on the show is our usual catch-up of our journey as longevity hackers, essential health news, and we're going to talk two major pillars of longevity, diet and exercise, with the astounding Layne Norton.
Yeah, Layne is awesome. I follow him on Instagram. I mean, he's a seriously smart dude. And
so do millions of others.
Yeah, kind of like you.
Yeah.
Right. But before we go any further, you had a really cool trip, which I've been wanting to ask you about, and I just want to save it for, on screen.
I thought you were just being rude.
No.
I'm just kidding.
So tell me, you went to Egypt.
I did.
Okay, what'd you do?
Oh my God, what didn't I do, honestly? Well, I was there for just about 2 weeks, which is a long time to spend anywhere, right? But we did so much. I mean, I can't even tell you how many temples I stepped inside. At least, I feel like at least about 7 or 8. We did a Nile cruise, which was really awesome. We were with this incredible tour guide that made us feel super safe with Captivating Egypt Tours, which I definitely recommend if anyone is ever trying to go to Egypt in any capacity. But wow, I guess the question is, what I'm really interested in is those deities. I think you were trying to conjure up deities, right? Maybe.
I want to hear deities.
Okay. Well, so we were really blessed and also paid the money to have these private visits in some of the temples, like when nobody is there. So either when before sunup or even when after it's closed. So we went in there. I was with a very, very powerful group, and we would go in there and just, I don't even know how to describe it, but we were meditating together, and we were really just conjuring up these great energy.
Come on, I need some. Did you get any deity?
Yeah. Oh,
Did
yeah.
you talk? What did you talk about?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, we got so much guidance, and I'm still having downloads now. If anyone is interested in Egypt gods or deities or whatever, then Sekhmet came through. Goddess Isis came through. Sekhmet is a god.
Okay.
She is of like fire, passion, courage. Like, I mean, I don't even like know how to describe this for people who are like just like tuning in, because I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. Like, I went there just thinking, okay, cool, we're going to go with these, we're going to spiritually go.
Just some deities.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of, because I knew to study, basically. I knew to study each one so that every time I went into a temple, I had an intention that was like kind of laying around that deity, so that it could, I don't know, like piggyback or benefit that part of my life, like to have an intention that was around maybe courage, or there's another temple that's all about forgiveness. So you go in there with like, how are you going to have like forgiveness for yourself? So like there's an intention in that. So walking into there, I mean, the biggest thing that I personally had to forgive was myself, honestly.
Yeah. And
so going into there with that intention, and there's also a ley line, if anyone knows about whatever the heck I'm talking about, because I didn't for a while. Yeah. It's all new discoveries to me too, but there's a huge ley line there. And to really feel the energy of that ley line and even meditate and have moments. Here's the thing. Also, I'm so glad that I remembered to say this. In each temple, the guards there actually will not let you stand there and meditate, will not let you hum, will not let you chant, will not let you do any of these things. And this obviously is to the point of something being real about that.
Yeah, I saw a video of you doing walk like the Egyptian with somebody.
That was
so
not
they allow
part
you
of
to do that.
Yes, they allowed me to do that. But that was also on a private visit, so I don't know if they wouldn't have otherwise. You gotta play.
If
you gotta
walk
play
like an Egyptian, you can do it.
Yes,
That's
yes.
the one thing that
But
you are allowed.
But isn't that insane though? Let's just say, isn't that crazy that the guards really will are watching you to make sure that you don't do any sort of meditation or anything? Like, there has to be something about that.
Yeah, maybe. Well, that sounds like it was pretty exciting.
Egypt was so great.
That's great.
I loved it. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I loved it.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well,
what have you been up to?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to Palm Springs next weekend.
Phenomenal. Good job.
Not quite Egypt.
All right. So it's time for our first segment. Have you heard? So there's an article called Mind Over Muscle, The Surprising Power of the Exercise Placebo Effect, which I was really excited to see that they're bringing it into other fields, because usually it's just like medication, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably worth talking a little bit just in broadly, like
1000%.
what, placebo effect is. And, the idea is that, that in medicine, a lot of times what we do is we try, when we're studying new drugs, we're trying to study new interventions, we will compare them to a placebo, which is basically making somebody think they're getting something and comparing it with somebody who's actually getting it. And the reason we do that is because...
See if it actually works.
Right? And then sometimes what you discover is that, well... it works, but it doesn't work any more than people who just think. It. Right, exactly.
If you're going to believe it, you can achieve it, right?
Right, maybe.
Yeah, honestly.
But then sometimes drugs will actually do more than the placebo. And so most of the time we focus on the drugs, and they say it has a better effect than the placebo. But if you think about it, most of the time we're completely ignoring the fact that people are getting some benefit just from the placebo. And so that opens up this entire world of, something I know you're big into, right?
Yeah.
Power of the mind.
Yeah, very much.
And we know, from a lot of studies on this, that there's reasons, for example, probably the biggest studies are when you talk about pain and placebo is related to pain, right? And what you find in people who think they're getting drugs that are for pain is that it actually triggers various types of
like trauma
opioids in their endogenous self-made body-made opioids in your own body that are getting released because you think you're getting medications, right? So that is effectively kind of the the biological explanation of a placebo effect. It's your body actually doing things to change that. So what's cool about this study and similar studies to it is they took like a bunch of people and they said, okay, this group here, you have a specific regimen, a specific exercise regimen.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And this was specifically tailored for you because we know exactly what, everything about you. And if you do
it makes you feel special.
It makes you feel special
yes,
a little bit,
it does.
right? And then they took this other people and said, okay, well, here's a regimen. It's not specifically for you, but it's, it's an exercise.
Here's just a workout
regimen.
routine.
Right.
Yeah.
It was basically the same regimen.
Yeah.
Right. So it was basically the same regimen. But after several weeks of these people doing this, what they found was the people who got the regimen that were told it was specifically for them,
although it wasn't,
ended up stronger, like specifically with squats. Right. And
interesting. Because there's a lot that goes into a squat, by the way.
There is a
lot
that goes into
and it's so beneficial for you.
Well, not only that, but listen, it's not only that they did more weight, but they basically tested the thickness of the muscle.
Oh, shoot.
And it was actually a bigger muscle.
Oh, wow.
In those people who were told that it was just for them.
Interesting.
So,
well, I mean, honestly, I can kind of see that if I look back on, all my interactions with people like personal trainers and things like that. Mm-hmm. People who even have personal training, they always feel like they're getting a way better workout, first of all, and it gets them really motivated. And then also whenever I have worked with or talked to a personal trainer, they always kind of start, at least the really good ones, in my opinion, they always start with an intention. The intention allows you somewhere to go to, kind of your anchor into whatever you're doing, your work, like whatever your workout is. So I kind of think that feeling special or like feeling like this is made for me kind of coincides with that. And that's why people do pay a lot of money for a personal trainer.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is that if you think about, the parallel to the pain stuff would be like what kinds of things trigger muscle growth? Well, maybe in these people there is there's things that are releasing more, testosterone in the men. Maybe there's, again, the brain coming into this thinking that this thing is going to make my muscles grow bigger, and therefore your body's creating things because of that idea in its head, in your head, that you are going to benefit from this.
Yeah.
It's specifically for me.
Right.
So there's various chemicals that are getting released from your body that are enhancing growth. So anyway, it's a cool idea. And
I think it's a great idea. I think that's really cool.
But it certainly explains a lot of, success that maybe people do get with personal trainers you're talking about, I mean.
And just and believing in themselves, honestly, because even showing up to the gym, it's like you have to get yourself there. You have to believe that, this is going to work out for you. Or people with extreme weight loss stories, like they have to be motivated. They have to show up each time and be like, no, I'm going to get to this. And they have to, it totally makes sense. I really love that. Okay, speaking of placebo, I found an article on examine.com about creatine being a placebo. So many people use this while they work out. Okay, have you heard this at all, Beck?
Okay, so there's a difference, in my opinion, between looking at something in terms of its short-term effect or what it's doing what it's doing physiologically, and whether or not it's actually beneficial. Okay. So when I take creatine, usually I do take it before a workout, but I also take it every single day, right? Creatine actually has shown to have significant benefits for brain health as well.
Okay.
Right?
Like memory and stuff,
yeah,
right? Yeah. Okay. I've heard about that. Yeah.
And I think when you have like a single study that's basically talking about how it may not be beneficial in sort of improving your workout, I'm not that impressed by it.
Okay.
And in reality, you're not doing any harm to yourself. Creatine is quite good for you, and there's a lot of brain health benefit.
Right.
So, I mean, I do think that Let me give you another example, right? There's all sorts of these medications that people are using for aging, right? NMN, rapamycin's the one that we've talked about before. And the reality is that there is benefits to these things, but you shouldn't be noticing them on a day-to-day basis because they're working at a cellular level.
Right.
But a lot of people who take them will be like, oh yeah, I feel 50 years younger or whatever.
I think it's that like, believe it to achieve it type
exactly.
thing.
So there's two things going on there. There's like what you're feeling and what that benefit might be for you that is placebo driven or what is your thought driven kind of thing, and then there is other potentially beneficial effects that you may not notice. And I think in creatine's case, I don't, for me, I know there's a lot of benefits for it outside of that workout boost. Right. So for me, my take is keep taking creatine.
Yeah. Because, if you're, and it's, it really, this is so funny that it really all just comes down to both articles. It's just about what you believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great. Actually.
Yeah. There is at least in terms of like how you, well, I should take that back because I was going to say it's how you initially feel about it. But in the case of the muscle one, you're actually seeing muscle growth. But then the muscle growth thing too is like, is that because people who thought they were going to get better results were actually pushing harder? And when they're pushing harder, they're getting more hypertrophy. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of elements.
Pushing harder in like terms of effort?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if they really think that something's tailored to them, I guess it depends on which team we're talking about. But if they really feel like something's going to happen, they're excited and they're going to show up and they're like, I'm going to do this. This is my chance to do it. Right. Yeah. So, but
I don't think placebo, just because something shows it's not necessarily better in one context doesn't negate it entirely as something that's beneficial.
Okay, because I thought we were going to have like a devastated CrossFit community. They're already dealing with like neck pain, 2 hernias, a divorce, and now a bruised ego. So,
ouch. That sounds like me, and I'm not even in CrossFit.
It's okay. Just go to Palm Springs.
I'm just going to go to CrossFit. I'm going to go to Palm
Springs. Just go find the sun.
I'm just going to find the sun.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to Longevity Junky. Now back to the show. So I was so looking forward to this interview. We were so lucky to grab some time with Dr. Layne Norton, and this is the breakdown.
So we're super lucky here to have Dr. Layne Norton, PhD, on the show today. Layne is a master fitness coach, founder of Bio Layne. He's also a successful bodybuilder, power lifter, and actually I don't know if it's current, but a world record in squats in 2015. Layne, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Is there anything you haven't done, man? This is pretty impressive.
Quite the resume.
Figured out how to say no to really hard stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, luckily you didn't say no to us. So, so I got to tell you, the thing is, and I, you've got a PhD in nutritional sciences, and I find this as a physician. I'm a biochemistry undergraduate degree. I have an MD, a neurosurgery residency, plastics residency. I find this the most confusing literature out there. And really smart people like you sometimes really disagree on stuff, making it even more confusing. And it reminds me, there's this quote, Charles Bukowski, and I like it. He says, the problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. Yeah. Like, you must be really confused right now. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yep.
But essentially, when you start, and it's a plot of perceived knowledge of how much knowledge you have versus your actual expertise. And what they find is when you start looking into a subject, a research subject, or anything, play a new sport, whatever, as you start, you are aware that you have no knowledge in the subject. And so your perceived knowledge is low. But as you begin to progress, your perceived knowledge versus your actual knowledge does not progress at the same rate. Your perceived knowledge peaks around 6 to 12 months, whereas your actual knowledge is not nearly as much as you think it is. And so we call that the peak of Mount Stupid. And then you hopefully, if you're self-aware enough and you continue to learn things you don't know, and you go into what's called the Valley of Despair, where you feel like you know nothing because everything gets contradicted. And then as you keep going, your perceived knowledge and your actual knowledge tend to get on the same page, right? But a lot of people stop at the peak of Mount Stupid, unfortunately.
I find the more that I learn, the more I find out I don't know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this breaks down, especially with nutritional research, very difficult to interpret some of this stuff. And most people just don't have the people ask me, well, do you really need a PhD to reinterpret some of this stuff? And I'm like, well, some of it, yeah, because if you don't understand the differences in study design, if you don't understand how the measurements were taken, I mean, you could be convinced of almost anything. If you don't understand statistics well, I don't want to say it's easy to fluff research. It's not easy. I think people have this idea, because people bring up funding source all the time. People have this idea that, it's all funding source and they just fabricate these studies. That's not really what happens. I mean, that does happen, but it's a lot less than people think. What tends to happen is people design research, especially researchers who may have a preconceived bias, to find what they want to find. And typically when I see a research study that I'm like, I see the claim that's made on social media or I see on the news, if I go, that doesn't seem right, almost without fail, I can go into the methods and go, oh yeah, of course, this is why they found this, right? You'll see something like, let's take, a lot of it boils down to people not understanding mechanisms versus outcomes. You can always find a biochemical mechanism to support whatever narrative you want to push. So let's take, I saw online one time somebody said, well, you don't want to drink coffee because coffee has caffeine. Caffeine raises your cortisol, and cortisol is going to cause you to store belly fat. Okay? Well, there's a logical thread that you can follow with that. And somebody who sounds smart and has a PhD, this person happened to have it in psychiatry, but still having a PhD, you can say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's a mechanism. What if we actually go and look at human studies where they give caffeine in a normal dose? What happens to levels of body fat? Because isn't that what we care about, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than the speculative mechanism. And when we look at it, it's either a neutral or positive effect on body fat, meaning people lose fat, like a small amount.
Right.
And so the way I describe it to people is when you're looking at outcomes, when you're looking at human outcomes, which is like, for example, risk of cardiovascular disease, insulin sensitivity, body fat gain or loss, like these sorts of things. When you're looking at outcomes, you're looking at the summation of hundreds, if not thousands, of different biochemical mechanisms that are summing up to an outcome. For example, aspirin we know is an anticoagulant. People take baby aspirins to prevent heart attacks. It's been shown very clearly it is an anticoagulant. But did you know it also activates procoagulant pathways? But the difference is, obviously, the anticoagulant effects are more powerful than the procoagulant effects because overall it's a procoagulant.
Right.
So the way I describe it is outcomes are like a mutual fund, whereas mechanisms are like single stocks. So what a lot of these influencers do is they go, they have the equivalent of going, you don't want to invest in this mutual fund. Look at these two stocks in this mutual fund that are down by 20%. While not telling you that overall the mutual fund is up by 25%. What do I care about? Those two stocks that aren't performing well, or the fact that overall this mutual fund with hundreds of funds inside of it is killing it? Yeah. You care about the fact that the mutual fund is killing it.
It's just to support their narrative.
I think the issue is there's a lot of conspiratorial stuff in this space.
Sure.
people talking about how really, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, PhDs, MDs, whoever, experts are completely full of crap, and that they're all funded, they're all making money because of this stuff. You don't know how many times I have gotten that just talking about statins or cholesterol, stuff like that. Oh yeah, you're getting paid. Like I'm getting paid by, somebody for a statin or something like that. It's complete nonsense. But, I want to make sure we shift to some of these things that people would.
Can I touch on that just real quick though? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is, are there some bad actors out there? For sure. And you can find that in any field. But just say, well, all these scientists are paid off. Okay, what you're saying, when you're saying, like, for people as an example, people say, well, they're repressing a cure for cancer, or they're not showing you this because they want to keep you sick. Yeah, so what you're saying is basically all scientists are pieces of shit, is what you're saying.
Right.
Because you're telling me that no scientists have loved ones that have cancer, who have cardiovascular disease, who are obese. You're telling me that they're going to keep this from their loved ones? Really? There's an amount of money you think that could buy them out? Really? And I like what, Neil deGrasse Tyson said when he was talking to Joe Rogan. He was kind of like, think about how hard it is for a person to keep just a normal secret. Okay? Now think about like one of the juiciest secrets in history, and that tens or hundreds of thousands of people would have to be in on it. Like, sorry, government is not that well organized, and there's no organization that's that well organized to keep this stuff hidden. And again, my friend Joseph Zumdell, who's a cancer biologist, his mom died from cancer. It's the whole reason he got into cancer research. There is no amount of money you could ever offer that guy to hide some kind of cure for cancer.
Right.
The problem is this stuff's complicated, and people don't like dealing in nuance and complication, and so black and white stuff just
well, and again, that goes back to, in certain influencers, if they can make it super simplistic, it makes it very convincing, right? Like you give a very clear thing and you say, well, gosh, the answer's right here, and they're not telling you about it because they have some other agenda, and that drives me freaking crazy. But anyway, let's
go into the science of it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I want to, you obviously are the guy to ask when it comes to nutrition. So I want to focus on two things that people obviously care about a lot. And those are, weight loss and also building muscle. So, okay. So I'm going to ask you a very basic question. I kind of know what you're going to say, but if you want to lose weight, what should your diet look like?
So in order to lose weight, we need to consume less calories than we expend. That is, people will argue that, but that is the core of things. You don't, and people don't. First off, let me give it a little bit of background. So calories are not a molecule or anything you can look at in a microscope. We're talking about energy, right? It's like measuring speed, right? Okay, so calories are literally interchangeable with the term energy. And they refer to the potential energy in the chemical bonds of food that is liberated and captured through the process of metabolism, right? That's the whole reason metabolism exists, is to capture this energy so we can use it to power our bodies. Okay. These are carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, these bonds. You ingest carbons into your body. They don't flutter off into oblivion. And by the same token, if you need energy, your body cannot create it out of nothing. It has to come from somewhere. And so your body's stored repository for energy is body fat. And much of that is because you can actually store more energy. You can store more energy per unit volume using fat than you can with any other kind of nutrient that we know of. So you need to eat less calories than you expend.
Right.
But here's the thing. People don't like this advice because there's inherent personal responsibility there, but also because it just seems too simple. People go, well, it can't be that simple. Just because something is simple, people confuse simple with easy. Just because something is simple in concept does not make it easy in execution. All we need to do is, I'm going to use another financial example. I think I read somewhere that 80% of Americans could not write a $5,000 check if they had to. Well, in order to save money, you need to earn more than you spend. I don't think anybody would try to negotiate that. So why are people broke? And you can't say it's just income. Yeah, that's certainly, people who have a bigger shovel that can dig a hole deeper, right? But there's plenty of people who make over six figures who are dead broke as well. And so it's not a knowledge problem. The problem is not a knowledge problem. It is an execution problem and a behavior problem. So If you want to lose weight, you want to lose fat, you've got to eat less calories than you burn.
Okay, so let me just for a second. Let me just play devil's advocate a little bit. I mean, it's not really devil's advocate because I think you'll agree with me on this. That you have, you are a guy who builds a lot of muscle, right? And you burn more. You burn more than your typical person because your muscles burn a lot. There is certain types of food that are going to help you build muscle and therefore burn more calories, correct? So I guess well, my point is simply this, is that there's no question what you're saying is accurate in the short term. Like if you want to lose weight, you got to have a calorie, deficiency, right? Mm-hmm. But in the long term, if somebody's thinking, okay, well, how do I plan my macronutrients so that if I am exercising, so I'm doing the right things, that I'm actually headed in the right direction to change my metabolism so that my burning is more, so I can burn more fat. So how do you look at it then from a macronutrient standpoint? Because at that point, it's not a simple equation of calories in, calories out, right?
Well, no, it still is. And I'll explain why.
Right.
So
okay.
If we're talking calories out, what we're talking about is your total daily energy expenditure, which is made up of essentially a couple different buckets.
Sure.
So you've got, and you're right, lean mass predicts about 90% of the variance in people's basal metabolic rate, which is the first bucket. Mm-hmm. So your basal metabolic rate is the cost of keeping the lights on, essentially. So just to run your body, run your heart, your brain, your organ systems. So BMR is what we would measure if you were just laying down breathing. That's it, right? So that's, if you did that all day, that's the energy you burn. And for most people, that's around 50 to 70% of their total daily energy expenditure. Then you've also got your physical activity, which falls into two buckets: purposeful and non-purposeful physical activity. So purposeful physical activity is exercise, right? Non-purposeful is something we call NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is like I'm moving my hands around and stuff and fidgeting, pacing. Those are NEAT. And actually that ends up, believe it or not, making up a pretty good portion of our daily energy expenditure, and tends to be the bulk from the physical activity side, and is something that's very modifiable as well. People don't realize it, that's one of the things they see with people who are obese resistant, is if they overeat, they tend to just spontaneously become more active without even realizing it. So somebody you might know, like somebody who, like if they eat a big meal, they start sweating, they get real fidgety, they feel like they got to go move around. That's kind of your classic phenotype. So we have those. We have basal metabolic rate, we have physical activity with the two different variants, and then we have our thermic effect of food, which is, you don't just get all the nutrients or all the calories out of the food you eat. You have to input some energy to get energy out of those. And the different macronutrients are not equivalent. So if we look at fats, for example, it's about 0 to 3% TEF, which is if you eat 100 calories from dietary fat, you net about 97 to 100. Carbohydrates are 5 to 10%. So if you eat 100 calories from carbohydrates, you net 90 to 95 calories. Protein is about 20, 30%. So if you eat 100 calories from protein, you net about 70 to 80 calories. Now, I don't want to completely dismiss TEF because it does make an impact, but it's on the order of at best maybe a couple hundred calories a day, because it's only about 5 to 15% of your total daily energy expenditure overall. So you can make a difference with a high protein diet, high fiber diet. Those things can help with your TEF. But really the long-term benefit is kind of what you alluded to. Protein has been shown to improve lean mass retention, especially during dieting. In fact, not my particular research, but research that came out of my lab with Dr. Don Layman showed that people who ate a high protein diet spared more lean mass during their weight loss period. And that actually helped prevent weight regain in the future. If you spare more lean mass, it can help you prevent more weight regain. And there might be a couple different mechanisms to that. Obviously, you burn a little bit more energy by having more lean mass, but also there may be some appetite regulatory stuff that plays into it as well. Right. So at the end of the day, that stuff does make a difference. And I think one of the confusion people have is they say, well, calories in, calories out assumes all calories are equal. Well, all calories are equal because they're just a unit of measurement, right? But all sources of calories do not have equal impacts on energy expenditure and appetite, right? People say, well, you can't tell me that your composition would be different if you ate 100 calories from Skittles versus 100 calories from, insert some other carbohydrate source. And I was like, well, the composition might be similar because it's still similar calories and even like the metabolizable calories, but you're probably going to feel a hell of a lot more hungry just eating Skittles compared to like, an apple or something like that, right? So yes, all calories are equal, but all sources are not equal. And where people get really confused, and I think this is where a lot of the confusion lies, is people equate calorie counting to a calorie deficit. I hear this all the time. They say, well, I tracked my calories. I didn't lose weight. Okay, well, you can keep a budget and not save money. Guess what? Regardless of what you think, you can say, oh, but I was tracking all my expenses and I don't understand. Like, I didn't save any money. So therefore, money in, money out must not work. No, you've got some expenses somewhere you aren't aware of is what's going on. Because if your bank account month over month isn't growing, regardless of how well you're budgeting, then you are not in a money surplus. And by the same token, regardless of how much of a calorie deficit you believe you're in, if you are not losing weight on average week over week, month over month, you're not in a calorie deficit. Now, you might be in what you think is a calorie deficit or what an online calculator told you should be a calorie deficit. But if you're not losing weight, it's not a deficit by definition. And I think another thing that kind of screws people up is like, these watches or whatnot, or the calorie counters not true. People, well, I burned 1,000 calories during my workout. And this calculator said this, and I always go back to, so what do you think is more likely? That you are somehow violating the laws of thermodynamics, or that perhaps that online calorie calculator and that calorie burned thing you're using might just not be accurate, right? And then I think to put a bow on this, we're talking about calorie deficit, but there are many different paths to Rome. A lot of different diets work for that. And in the research literature, no diet really stands out as being better than another diet in terms of maybe high protein diet, a little bit better for energy expenditure and muscle retention. But for long-term fat loss, if you equate protein and calories, no diet stands out as better than another one for long-term kind of.
Is there any that are your favorite?
So here's what I tell people. The world is your oyster. So you have to restrict to lose weight, but choose the form of restriction that feels the least restrictive to you. So this is why you'll hear people say, oh, I did a keto diet. I didn't even feel like I was hungry. Or I did intermittent fasting. It didn't even feel like I was dieting. Or for me, I do flexible dieting, which is like I track my calories and my macros, and I allow myself within reason to eat kind of the foods I like to eat as long as I'm getting enough total fiber in and my micronutrients. Because I have, as you pointed out, I have a large energy expenditure box. So I have more room in my budget to have some fun, right? Like if you make $1 million a year and you can pay your mortgage and your all your requirements, and you want to go buy a sports car with some extra money as long as you're putting money away. I mean, a sports car is the great investment, but who cares? If you want it and you can afford it, right? But if you're making $50,000 a year, maybe buying that sports car isn't such a good idea. That's kind of similar with, people who burn a large amount of energy versus, say, maybe a small woman who's, 120 pounds, not a ton of lean mass. She's going to have a much smaller budget for what she wants to do. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion jumps in. But I would say for people out there, try different diets and see what feels easier to you. Because you have your pick of the tools available out there, because none of them really come through as being better than another one. And I'll get people all the time will say, well, I did intermittent fasting. It felt easy. And I'll say, for you. Yeah. But that's not the experience of everybody.
Can I also ask real quick, it also has to make like how you cook your food, because if you overcook some things, then it gets into more of it gets glycinated, right? So does that matter as well?
I mean, I with meats and, those sorts of things.
Or vegetables and things like that.
Like glycated end products. I haven't specifically looked at the research on overcooking vegetables. I know with overcooking meats, there's concerns because you can have polyaromatic hydrocarbons, heterocyclic amines, those sorts of things. With vegetables, I tell people, boiling, sauteing, you typically don't want to char many foods. Charring typically, at least in the research literature, tends to be where you find some carcinogenic compounds. But again, like I always tell people, I think people get way too caught up in single meals, single foods. You got to look at this as a holistic diet, right? Like I don't always make the theoretical best choice in my diet, right? Like I might go out and watch the sunset and enjoy a glass of bourbon or something like that. Well, Layne, why are you doing that? It's not good for you. Well, because 95% of my diet is fantastic. And so I'm not worried about, having something quote unquote bad for me every once in a while, because most of my diet is very on point. And quite frankly, this is something I become passionate about later in life. People stress about these small things so much, and there is a linear effect of stress on mortality, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And so I'll tell people sometimes, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but my guess is the stress you're spending on so much of this little stuff is probably killing you faster than that small thing you're worried about, right?
Agreed.
So I tell people, like, I like one of my favorite quotes is, there's no solutions, only trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
So like, if me sitting out here having an occasional glass of bourbon watching the sunset makes me really relaxed, I feel good, and I'm not stressed about, again, there's no way I can run an RCT on this, but my guess is the impact is pretty darn small overall. Right? But if you're going out and you're getting sloshed every day, yeah, that's going to have a negative effect, right? So I always tell people, like, just, keep your brain flipped on when it comes to this stuff. You don't have to be perfect. What you have to be is consistent.
So we've talked a little bit about protein, and we know that lean muscle mass is probably one of the biggest predictors of longevity in general.
Yes.
What do we know about building muscle in terms of diet and nutrition? This is something obviously you spend a lot of time on. It's part of your identity. So tell us what we need to know about building muscle and nutrition.
Yeah, so nutritionally, I got that there. There's my thesis right up there on that big old bookshelf that's mostly empty. I know everybody comments on it. So, what we know with regards to building muscle nutritionally is you've got two big levers. The first one is protein, right? Because we know that dietary protein can stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And depending on the research you look at, the benefits to dietary protein cap out at about 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is kind of around that old 1 gram per pound of body weight. But I will say, with many things in metabolism, there's not typically hard caps. I don't know if you all are familiar with like a mathematical term called an asymptote, but essentially it's a where you continue to approach something, it never stops, but the
incremental increase
just becomes so incremental that you don't really see a difference, right? We see this with a lot of things. My suspicion, because there have been some meta-regressions that suggest that the benefits of protein don't actually cap out, my suspicion is because this stuff is so messy to measure in humans, and you're looking at, 8 to 12 week studies to look at lean mass, which you're looking at small differences between small numbers. My suspicion is that protein doesn't have like a hard cap, but that practically once you get above, 1 gram per pound, that the gains become so minimal, it's questionable as to, does it make more sense to keep trying to shove more protein in and limit your overall dietary diversity? Or we've gotten 95, 99% of these benefits. Now let's, make sure we're taking care of our requirements elsewhere.
Do we really use that much protein when we're building muscle? It just seems like an enormous, like I have been doing, I've been doing the gram per pound, and I'm 215 pounds. That is so much protein, man. It just feels unnatural to be taking that. But I'm curious, and I can't help but think, do I really need this? Will this really make a big difference if I'm at, 0.75 versus 1? I'm just curious on your take on that.
Big difference for that intake? I'd say probably not, right? So, I'm kind of an abnormality, right? Like I still compete in powerlifting. I compete in bodybuilding. I want to be the biggest most muscular, strong human being I can be drug free. And so I push protein, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm up around 250 grams of protein a day, right? But your question is interesting because the question is, does the body use that much protein to build muscle?
Right.
So the answer is no, but you require a disproportionate amount of protein to stimulate the process of building protein to actually happen. So what I mean by that is some people have said, well, if you look at how much protein you can, like it actually takes, like if you look at how many amino acids you can deposit in muscle tissue per day, it's on the order of like 5 to 10 grams per day. So if we know that all you need to be in a positive nitrogen balance is around 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein, which is like less than half a gram per pound, right? Then why can't you just put 10 grams on top of that and be done? Well, because to stimulate and maximize the protein synthetic response, you require a disproportionate amount of protein present at a meal to get that response.
Now, what about so there is some literature. I know that I believe this was part of some of the research you were doing too.
Let me give real quick. Let me give one more financial example, right?
Okay.
So a lot of times, if you want to grow your business, right? Like let's say you're making $100,000 a year, and your expenses are $20,000. So you're taking home $80,000. If you want to get to $10 million, you think, well, I can just, match my expenses and go up. But no, a lot of times it requires a disproportionate amount of expenses to get to that level of revenue, right? So anyway, that's a little financial example.
Or you could become one of my investors in one of my private equity funds. So.
Okay.
Good
segue.
Way to slip that in there.
No. So what I wanted to get at too, though, is that specifically because what you're talking about is sort of this critical mass of protein that is needed to stimulate growth. And I know there has been some research, and I think you were also involved with some of this research. Maybe I read about this with branched chain amino acids, leucine, lysine, specific amino acids that seem to be involved with that trigger of muscle growth. Can you talk, because if that were the case, wouldn't you need just sort of disproportional amounts of that to trigger and then, and call it a day?
Yeah. So that's that guy sitting right there.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
So yeah, the amino acid that appears to be responsible for probably about 80 to 90% of the protein synthetic response is the amino acid called leucine. But in research studies, and it is a pretty consistent effect, right? So for example, we did a study where we gave whey protein or wheat protein, same total protein, same calories, and we saw a much greater response of whey protein for protein synthesis than wheat. But when we added leucine to the wheat protein to match the leucine content of whey protein, the responses were exactly the same. So it does appear that it is leucine that does that, but they've done studies where they try to provide supplemental leucine and it doesn't appear to build muscle, which may seem very, quite dichotomous, right? Like that appears to be kind of like a weird dichotomy. Well, the problem is you need the other amino acids present in the right amounts to continue growing muscle tissue. And if you have enough of those present, you're probably getting enough total protein, enough total leucine anyway. And so, what I tell people is if you're consuming high quality protein sources, bioavailable high quality protein sources, you're probably getting enough leucine. If you're getting enough total protein, and we even saw this with plant proteins because people crap on plant proteins, but if you get enough total protein in from plants, you can have the same stimulatory response as you do with animal protein. It's just animal protein tends to be a little bit easier because it's more concentrated, right? Like you have more protein per weight of food, and it's more bioavailable, and it tends to have a little bit better amino acid profile. But if you get the plant proteins high enough, you'll still have a similar response. And so I think that when it comes to protein, supplementing with leucine or branched chain amino acids, I think is probably not really warranted. And that's something I did change my mind on over the last 20 years. Because I actually used to sell a branched chain amino acid supplement, branched chain used to be part of a supplement I sold with a previous supplement company about 7 years ago. And now in our current company, we don't sell it anymore just because I looked at the weight of evidence and just it doesn't seem to do anything in isolation. So it is important as a part of an overall diet. You need enough leucine in those meals to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But again, if you're consuming enough dietary protein from good sources, you're going to get that leucine along with the other amino acids that it's needed to actually build that new tissue.
There are very differing perspectives from some pretty smart people like Peter Attia on one side, Dr. Walter Longo on the other, David Sinclair, about the long-term effects on longevity of high-protein diets. Mm. This is an area that, it's funny because it's very confusing. And I'll tell you, I read something recent from Peter, and I actually sent it over to I don't know if you know Walter Longo. He's
not personally, but I know of him.
Yeah,
yes.
But I sent it over to Walter, and he had sort of a violent reaction to it. And but both of them I respect a great deal. And again, this is where the confusion ends up being. But what's your take on longevity and high protein diets?
Yeah, so I've seen some of Walter's research. A lot of it is in animal models, and then they did do some epidemiology in humans. The paper they published in 2014, or I think it was 2014, that got a lot of play. They were looking at a subsection of people. The overall, if you actually dig into the research data used, the overall effect on overall mortality was protein had really no effect on mortality. And if you, as my PhD advisor likes to say, if you torture the data enough, it will confess what you wish it to confess.
Right.
And so you can kind of do, and I'm not accusing him of this, all researchers do this, but they look at subsections of data to see if there's any associations. If you look at enough epidemiology, you can find associations between weird stuff, trust me. Now, what I would say is a lot of what his claims are, at least that I've seen, are that, protein stimulates mTOR and IGF-1, both of which are active in cancer. And my response to that would be, if we're going to base longevity, like project out based on short-term acute responses, then we have to apply that logic symmetrically. Okay, so this is a thing I'm big on now, is most people apply logic asymmetrically, meaning if something fits our bias, our level of skepticism is non-existent, but if something goes against our bias, our level of skepticism is up here, right? And everybody falls victim to that. But we can apply logic symmetrically. And what I mean by that is, okay, so protein stimulates mTOR after a meal, stimulates IGF-1. Okay, carbohydrates stimulate insulin and raise blood glucose. If you have chronically elevated insulin and blood glucose, it's very bad for you, right? They also stimulate inflammatory response. And fat impedes flow-mediated dilation, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So protein, carbs, fats, can't eat any of those if we're going based off acute responses. Also, you don't want to exercise based on acute responses because exercise elevates your heart rate, elevates your blood pressure, elevates your IGF-1. By the way, resistance training raises IGF-1 and mTOR way more than dietary protein. Mm-hmm. So where's the research data showing that resistance training is going to give you... Oh, wait, it's actually the opposite. Mm-hmm. So I think when I really try to get people to focus on lifestyle and the big bricks, because when we get down into this kind of minutia, we can find an argument based on that sort of logic for anything, right?
Yeah.
And so if we look at the big bricks, which to me is here's the big stuff for longevity. People like to make up numbers, so I'm making up a number. But my suspicion is you could get 95% of longevity and quality of life benefits through the following few things: manage your diet, don't become obese, maintain a lean and healthy body weight, resistance train and exercise, okay? Don't smoke, limit your consumption of alcohol or avoid if you can, get enough sleep, and manage your psychological stress. And if you did those 6 things brutally consistently, I bet on balance, you would probably live a very long, healthy life. Because and again, if we look at the risk ratios, right? So that's another thing is people don't like know scale. So like when we look at the odds ratios of risk of disease and mortality with something like these studies, you see 10, 15% increased risk with some of these things, right? Okay, that's a relative risk increase, meaning if over a 10-year period, your absolute risk of mortality is, say, 10%, a 15% relative risk increase takes that to 11.5%, not 25%, right? So let's look at something like the stuff that actually does matter, like the big levers. Okay, smoking, what does that elevate your risk of cancer and mortality? Oh, 300 to 900%.
Yeah.
What does being obese elevate your risk of mortality, cardiovascular disease, and cancer? Oh, 80 to 300%. So these are big. What does psychological stress do? 80 to 100%, a linear effect. So again, we're talking about much bigger numbers. So I really try, because folks tend to, I like what Peter actually said, Peter Attias, one of the reasons he said he didn't like biohacking. He said because of the mind space that it occupies, right?
Yeah.
Because when you don't give people all the information about, hey, maybe this thing raises risk, but then you don't tell them that it's actually a really small elevation of risk versus something else, people, it's like the argument I'll tell people will make up fear-based content around like diet soda, for example, right? And I'll show them this research. They go, well, isn't it better that everybody just drinks water? I'm like, you're making the wrong inference. You're thinking if you demonize soda and diet soda, that people will drink water. And what's actually likely to happen is people go, you know what? I could never just drink water, so I'm just going to drink regular soda since diet soda is just as bad for me. And it's like, no, diet soda would be a much better choice than regular soda, like based on all the human randomized control trials. So let's not like take this tool out of people's hands, right? Let's give people the actual evidence, but that's not as sexy.
Let's talk about fasting.
Okay.
I know this is another area. So there's a couple different kinds of fasting, and it's interesting because I was doing a short window, less than 8 hour fasting for like 3 years or whatever, and I found it for me actually it seemed to be beneficial in terms of some weight loss and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I personally actually stopped that recently in part because some of the data that came out from the American Heart Association suggesting shorter windows, like 8 hours or less. Now you can argue this is not a particularly good study, but it did show almost a doubling in cardiovascular death, which I wasn't going to ignore. And then I brought this up again to our Walter Longo to get his take. And Walter sent me a couple papers on that were not recent. They were just 3 or 4 years ago on skipping breakfast. Skipping breakfast actually is associated with which I guess in this case is sort of like that's how most people who are doing the short windows are doing it, right? They're skipping breakfast. But he showed he sent me some articles. One big meta-analysis showing increases in hypertension, and then another meta-analysis showing significant increases, I think 20% increase in cardiovascular disease. So I'm just curious on your whole take on the reason I want to bring this up is because it's such a thing right now. And it is a very confusing thing. And there is a difference between, intermittent fasting, as we call it, versus people who are fasting for multiple days at a time to get different benefits. So I want to get your take on that.
So I'll start off by saying, I'm going to hopefully show how unbiased I can be because of all the groups that really make me annoyed. Intermittent fasting people tend to be the most smug of all of them.
Well, you love Dr. Fung.
I would love, my ego would love to just take the football and spike it, right?
Yeah.
But let's actually break this down. So first off, I'll say if you go based on epidemiology, like just for stuff, you end up running around in circles because, okay, well, if I do this, it raises this risk. But then when I do the other thing, it raises this risk, right? And I think there was a study that actually showed that eating anything at any time raised the risk of colorectal cancer, right? So,
and that 100% mortality risk of eating at some point, of dying at some point.
Yeah. So I think what I would say is the following. So, with regards to that study specifically that you brought up, that got a lot of play, I think probably like 6 or 9 months ago.
Yeah.
About the risk, about an 80% increased risk from narrowing food windows for heart disease. So here's what I'll say about that. It is important to point out that these were not people who identified as doing intermittent fasting, right? These were people who identified that they had shortened eating windows. And so what you see is people who skip breakfast tend to have lower overall diet quality. And it doesn't say anything about like how many overall calories they consume. I mean, again, like this is an anecdote, but my dad has never eaten breakfast and my dad is overweight, right? He probably eats most of his food in about an 8-hour window, to be quite honest with you, an 8 or 9 hour window, right? So I think we got to be careful with how much stock we put in epidemiology. So if we look at the randomized control trials, right, looking at intermittent fasting as a tool for weight loss, we see people improve their insulin sensitivity. We see they improve their markers of glycemia. We say they improve all these different metabolic markers of cardiovascular health. And so to me, I just look at it as a tool to manage body weight and all the benefits therein. As far as like, cardiovascular disease risk, it'd be hard for me to kind of speculate on a mechanism between how shortening feeding windows would cause that, right? I really do think that this is just simply a marker of a poor overall diet quality, right? Whereas like another example of that is I don't think red meat inherently is bad for you necessarily. I think fatty cuts of red meat are high in saturated fat, raise LDL cholesterol, and of course we know the risks associated with that. But like red meat in and of itself, people who eat more red meat in these epidemiology studies, it actually just ends up being a good marker for poor diet quality because most of the red meat they're eating is processed and a lot of times from like fast food stuff, right? Like these aren't people eating like lean, sirloin, that sort of, they're eating, very fatty cuts of meat. A lot of times it's just ground chuck that's, 30% fat, right? So again, I'm not too worried about that particular study. I think, if somebody likes intermittent fasting, it can be a useful tool for controlling their body fat. But when we look at, a lot of people go to the other extreme with like, well, intermittent fasting is the best thing for, all these different things. And we actually now, if you look at the most tightly controlled human randomized control trials, where they equate calories, they equate protein, they monitor the subjects, they don't see differences in pretty much anything compared to just normal dieting with calorie restriction compared to same weekly calories for intermittent fasting. And they even did that, like they did one study with alternate day fasting and showed very similar results. Actually, alternate day fasting did show a little bit less lean mass at the end of the study, which can kind of make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, I think people who are doing, 8-hour windows for the first time or shorter than 8-hour windows are probably inherently reducing the amount of calories they're taking in. And if you're reducing the number of calories you're taking in, you're almost certainly going to improve your insulin sensitivity and any number of other metabolic markers. So I can see how you would sort of think that has something magical to do with the 8-hour window, but I don't think that that's probably the case. And on the flip side of it, I don't know. Although I completely agree with you on those studies, I don't take them too, I also don't want to be flippant about them because if you show a 92% increase in cardiovascular mortality, even if it's a poor study, I'm going to say, well, maybe it's not worth it for me. But that's kind of what I would, my take on that.
Let me address that just real quick because I think when it comes to epidemiology, here's what I'll tell you when I'm convinced, okay? Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's take the example of red meat. If you look at the risk of red meat and cancer, it's all over the place. It's like quite a few studies say yes, some studies say no. And I don't want to go too far into it because I know we're running out of time, but when they equate essentially for diet quality by looking at number of fruits and vegetables servings, the association of red meat with cancer goes away when you account for overall diet quality and fruit and vegetable intake. But if we look at something like dietary fiber, if we do a forest plot of dietary fiber studies and looking at benefits of mortality, reduces the risk of mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer, versus no benefit or, a risk factor, it's not like they're all over the place. They're all on this side, right? Like they're all on the side of benefit. And usually in the dose response effect. So for me to be pretty convinced by epidemiology, first off, it has to be very, very consistent. And I want to see a dose response, right? And we see that with dietary fiber. Again, like I'll go back, like there was a study that came out from the Nutrisante cohort out of France a few years ago that I think they concluded that aspartame was associated with an increased risk of cancer. Well, I looked at the actual raw data, and it was associated with people who consumed nothing versus a low to moderate amount. But then the risk actually went down in the highest consumers, the highest tertile. And so I'm not aware of many things that are carcinogenic at a low to moderate dose, but then not carcinogenic at a high dose, right? And so when I look at that, I go, that's some kind of data artifact. I don't really know what it means, right? Because we expect a dose response. Smoking is a dose response. The people who smoke more, their risk of cancer and cardiovascular disease goes up. And so that's where I become, like, I get more convinced. But again, I don't want to say you're not doing the wrong thing by not doing intermittent fasting, especially since it is just a tool to control calorie intake. I think what a lot of people think about intermittent fasting is, oh, well, this guy said it activates autophagy mode, and that's going to make me live forever. Okay, well, this is where biochemical terms become buzzwords. People throw them around without actually understanding what they are. So autophagy is just basically lysosomal protein degradation, which is involved in cellular remodeling. But autophagy is elevated in some cancers. It's elevated in some wasting diseases. Like, it's not always a good thing. And there is no autophagy mode, right? Like, it's a relative rate. So if you fast, your rate of autophagy will go up. If you exercise, your rate of autophagy will go up. If you eat food, your rate of autophagy will go down, but it's still going. And when we look at, there haven't been studies to directly measure this, but my suspicion is this very thing. Okay, if you're doing alternate day fasting and we're equating calories, right? Because we have to compare apples to apples. Well, that means you're having to eat twice as much on your alternate day fast if we're going to compare it apples to apples. And so, sure, your rates of autophagy are probably much higher the day you're fasting. And guess what's happening on the day where you're eating more? They're much lower, right? And so the net over the course of a week is probably going to be pretty similar. And so, again, I don't want to seem like I'm coming down on fasting or saying it's not useful. I think it is useful because when it comes to dietary restriction to maintain a healthy body weight, you have essentially three buckets, as my friend Peter Attia says. You can do dietary restriction, which is low carb, low fat, eat clean, whatever have you. You can do time restriction, narrowing your feeding window so that you eat less calories, or you can do a tracking restriction where you're tracking everything and making sure that you're eating less than you're burning. But again, all those things work for the same reasons, that they get you to consume less calories than you're expending. So shoot.
We know you got to get going, but appreciate all the time that you've given us here today. Tell us how we can get. I mean, you've got some programs. You've got a fantastic Instagram channel that I watch all the time, and
it's all about debunking.
Yeah, I love the debunking, and I also like watching you hit those barbells, because I feel like you're like, the barbells are like wild animals, and you're like hunting them down and killing them. It's kind of what it looks like to me when you're.
Yeah, if I had to describe myself in one word, it would be enthusiastic. I'm very enthusiastic.
There you go.
Pretty much across all walks of life. Most of my friends need a nap after spending a few hours with me. No, I mean, I the best place to find me is, like you said, on Instagram at Bio Layne. And then my website's biolayne.com. I do everything in the fitness industry. I have a, coaching team. So we do, one-on-one nutrition coaching, of course. I have a nutrition coaching app, Carbon Diet Coach, which is just $10 a month that I help write the algorithm for, that will do, basically customized nutrition in your pocket on your phone. I have programs available on my website through the Workout Builder. I have a research review called Reps, where we break down studies every month. I have a supplement line called Outwork Nutrition, which is all evidence-based, no BS supplements. And I have a coaching courses. So if people want to become more educated about the stuff we're talking about, like actually really dig into the research, I have something called Physique Coaching Academy, where, my goal is to train the next generation of coaches to be the best coaches that they can be, right? So that's kind of the long and short of long. I got some books out there. Like I keep busy.
Yeah.
Sounds like
Good for you. Good for you. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Layne. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our healthy takeout. Welcome back, Longevity Junkies. Wow, that was an incredible interview.
And the thing is, again, nutrition in particular, I mean, exercise is kind of, I think there's a lot more science. Nutrition, the science is all over the place because, first of all, it's very difficult research to do. Second of all, again, there's really, really smart people who completely and utterly disagree with each other on some of these things. And so if you and I, who are like sort of knee deep in this stuff, are confused, imagine anybody else who's not getting the same access to these kinds of experts and this kind of information. I mean, it is insane. So I think the goal of our show is at least to try to give a few different experts' opinions, and at the end of the day, just let people kind of make their own decisions. So.
Yeah, but one thing I do respect about Dr. Layne Norton is if there's somebody having such an incredible one lane opinion, and enough of his followers kind of share a video or something, he will go on YouTube. I've seen him do a debunking of this. So I do appreciate him, proving or having proof of evidence that, he has an argument against it or something, so that people can make their own judgment, honestly, because that's exactly what we're saying. Like, that's all you need. You have to do your own research too. And
remember, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, this whole longevity space, right? And there are experts everywhere, right? And I'm not saying you have to have an MD or a PhD to be an expert, but I mean, listen, everybody and their mother has an opinion on what you're supposed to do and comes up with some sort of special diet or gives you information. It's at least useful to have somebody like Layne to give you what the science says. And that's what we need to try to keep doing. So great show. Nikki, I'm sure you've got some, exotic place to go. I'm off to Palm Springs. Why don't you go ahead and read us out?
Longevity Junky is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by me, Nikki Lee, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. The show is produced by Pretty Fast. Original music by Alloy Tracks. We're distributed by our friends at Acast, and we'll see you next time.